Okay, this is Bentley here at H&H Color Lab, and today's class is using Automator. And Automator is a Mac workflow tool. Probably the easiest way to explain what Automator is, if you're not familiar with it, is like Photoshop, actions are to Photoshop. So you can go open an image in Photoshop and run an action to apply a bunch of repetitive steps to it, whether it's running certain filters, resizing it, things like that. You can then also use Automator for your computer, for your Mac operating system. So you can use it to then go launch a bunch of images and copy them over to a certain folder. You can actually use Automator to launch Photoshop and then run specific actions on that. So what I'm going to go through today is a couple of different Automator workflows and explain the difference between a workflow and an application on an Automator, show you some real basic ones, step you through how to build one, and then show you some more advanced things that you can do with Automator to hopefully help you out. So let's get started, and I'm going to show you some of the things that you can do with Automator. I'm going to switch over to a screen sharing mode, and when I do this, the screen that you're looking at is going to disappear. But up in the top center of your screen, you're going to see a little drop-down menu that you can click on, and it will allow you to chat to me. So during the screen sharing, if you have any questions, just go ahead and type that into that chat dialog, and I'll be monitoring those on an additional screen, and I can hopefully will be able to answer your questions, things like that. So give me just a second here to get this set up. And welcome, Tim. Glad you were able to make it today. So let's get started. First off, where do you find Automator? Where is it? Do you have to buy it? So where you find Automator is it's in your applications folder. And actually, before I go to that, I'm going to show you a couple things that Automator can do. So you're actually seeing my desktop at the moment, and this is typically how my desktop looks. It is a mess. I always have all sorts of stuff going on it, keeping track of it. But when I teach a web class, I don't like having all that clutter in the background. So I wrote a little Automator to clean that up. Now here's the problem. I could just make a new folder and drag everything into it, but there's certain folders on my desktop that I always need if I'm doing an easy event class, if I'm doing a design class, and if I move where they are, it breaks links in different pieces of software. So there are certain things I need to leave behind. So I've highlighted the things that I always need to leave behind in green. So you see up here in the upper portion some Easy Suite folders, a Lightroom catalog folder, this design folder down here. But then I also set another rule in Automator that says any folder that I have added a label to, and to add the label, I can just right-click on a folder and choose a label color down here. If the label is orange, I want to leave that behind as well, because that is something that I'm using for that class. So the way this Automator works is I just go down here, and I have a little folder of them, and I created one called Cleanup. When I run that, it creates a folder with today's date on it, and moves everything into that folder that was on my desktop except for the folders that are the ones I specified behind here, these Easy Suite ones and design ones, and then any ones that I've tagged in orange. So that's just a real quick use of Automator. I mean, that's one that's specific for me, but that's something that anyone can do. Another one that I do, if you have a computer that you use for sales as well as production, and you want to have a specific background in there, I just made a little Automator that comes in and automatically, when I run it, switches my desktop to the logo desktop that I want to use. So let's go in and look at Automator. And as I was saying, where do I find it? Automator is listed in my applications folder. I've got that sorted wrong. And I'm going to change my view here to icons, and this is what Automator looks like. It's this little robot dude, if I can get that right in the center of the screen. There you go, right there, a little robot guy. So when you open that, that's going to open up a workflow. So we can come in and say, I want to create a new workflow. So we're going to go through and create some real basic workflows to get started. And let me back up a second here and move this over to this side. So the first workflow that we want to do is just a real basic renaming workflow. So I'm going to show you how to just rename a batch of files because that gets you into the idea of what we want to do. So when we start Automator, it gives us a couple different things that we can start. We can create a workflow, an application, we can create a service, we can do folder actions, iCal alarms, and there's a print and an image capture. Just about always when I start working with Automator, I create a workflow. Now a workflow is, for example, I'll open up a workflow over here. This is a workflow that we're looking at right now. In the workflow, we see all these different options, all this stuff that's going on, and we're going to go through that. And a workflow lets me come in and edit and modify those things. If I create an application is what I actually run to make Automator work. I can't go back and edit it. So I actually use a workflow, and when I create a workflow and save it, then I do a second save and tell it to create the application. Does that make sense? So a workflow is what you can edit. The application is what you run. In Photoshop terms, a workflow would be like creating the action, and an application would be one of two things, either running the action in button mode where you can't really get in and change it, or creating a droplet from that action where you just drop images on it and things happen. Services are built into your Mac Finder menu. So for example, a service, if I come up here to Finder and see Services, there is my desktop cleanup. So I could run it from there. So I could set things up as a service to run as well. I don't use that a lot in my workflow. It's something that I create just to show you how it can be done, but it's not something that I tend to do frequently. So we're going to create a workflow. And when we start, we have this big blank area on the right side. And then over on the left, we see actions, we see variables, and we're going to use both of those. And your actions you see are set into different areas like calendar or our contacts. I can come into files or folders. I can look and see stuff for mail. Now you'll notice in here that your icons change as you're looking at different things, and that's going to be based on applications. For example, when I installed Microsoft Outlook for my Mac, it added actions for Automator in there that I can see now in my folder. There's another plugin we're going to talk about a little bit later on. When I added that, it added all sorts of applications that tag into Photoshop. So I can do that as well. So depending on what software that you have will determine what you see in here. For example, in presentations, it sets up stuff for Keynote, and it also sets up stuff for PowerPoint. So it just depends on what you're doing will determine what's in there. So we're going to create a new workflow, and we want to do just a real basic workflow, and we want to rename a folder of images. So the first thing that we need to do is go and say, ask for Finder items. And this is probably the biggest challenge with Automator, is learning kind of the verbiage that it uses. When you read through these things, at first they kind of seem kind of strange, and the second thing is the sequencing isn't quite the normal way you would think about it. It's not always A, B, C. It's kind of like if you learn a foreign language, sometimes you say, instead of us saying it's hot outside today it's hot, they might say hot is today. You know what I mean? They change around the adverbs and adjectives and all that stuff. The same type of thing happens in Automator. Sometimes you have to put things in a slightly different sequence, but as you start building more and more Automators, it starts making sense. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask for Finder items. So what this is going to do is I have a prompt, and I'm going to make this more descriptive. And I'm going to go in and say, select files that you want to rename. because that's what we're doing, and I want that to be very specific. I can tell it where I want to start. If I want to say, hey, these are going to always be on an external hard drive, I could say Other, and that's going to bring up a Finder window. In just a moment, there we go. And I could point to, for example, an external hard drive and say that's where I want to go. I could also say that is coming on my desktop. I can choose wherever that needs to be to get into where I want to start. So in this case, I'm going to just choose the default, start on my desktop. Next thing I'm going to do, and if I don't know what to look for, I'm just going to start typing in rename. I want to rename stuff. So I see rename Finder items. So I just drag and drop that down into place. Now this one gives me an option that says, hey, this is going to change your names. Do you want to copy them before you rename them, or do you just want to rename them as they are? So it's saying, would you like to add a copy Finder item so that the copies are changed and your originals are preserved? In this instance, I don't want to do that, so I'm just going to say don't add. So it brings up add date or time to Finder name items. Well, the reason it said that when I said rename is because that's this option under the drop down over here on the right side. So I'm going to go ahead and change that because I want to say make sequential. I want a numeric renaming. So I can add the number to the existing name, which I see an example down here, or I can type in a new name. So I'm going to go ahead and type in a new name, and I'm going to call it web class. And we see next it says where do we want to place the number, after the name or before the name. And the example down here shows web class -1. We can separate it by a dash, a period, a space, whatever we want. I typically use a dash. And you can also zero pad how many digits you want that to be. So I tend to zero pad everything as a 3-digit number. So this is going to rename those files as web class and start at 001. So I could say, what do I want my start number to be? I'm going to say 1,000. Whatever. So I'm going to go with 1. So now I'm going to save this. I'm going to File, Save. And I'm going to save this first as a workflow. I'm going to rename this. I'm going to save this as rename 1 because we're going to do several different rename options. Press Save. So on my desktop now, you see I have this. I'm going to move this out of the way as my computer thinks again. I have a rename icon that is on my desktop that is the workflow. So I can double click on that to open it up, and now I'm going to save it a second time. I'm going to go File, Save As, and instead of saving this file format as a workflow, I'm going to save it as an application and press Save Now. Let me close a couple things real quick. Okay, so now on my desktop, you see I have our little robot guy. He's my Automator. Okay, so let's get this going and show you what this does. So I'm going to move this application folder off of my desktop for the moment. And we're going to go into this folder, which I have appropriately named to rename. Now, this is just a bunch of really small text files, just so this will go really, really fast. But you see I have files named sequentially from image 2315 through image 2330 to simulate like they're off of a camera card. So I'm going to come in and run my application, the little robot guy, double click on him. And it's going to say right up here at the top, select the files that you want to rename. I'm going to go into my folder that says to rename. I'm going to select, oh, I just messed up. See, it won't let me select multiple images in there. So I need to press cancel because I'm not going to rename. And I'm going to delete that Automator. So I'm going to just say move to trash. This is why I have a workflow. I need to open that back up. And right here where it says ask for Finder items, I didn't check allow multiple selections. Really easy mistake to make, but very easy to undo. So I'm going to select that. I'm going to save the workflow, and then I'm going to save that again as an application. Saving it on the desktop. Get rid of that. And there's my Automator. Double click on it to run. Go back into my rename folder. Now I can select all the images in there by either shift clicking, command press, to grab, I can grab one, I can press command A, any way you want to select all those files, and just press choose. And we can see now it has renamed those all as web class 001. So every time I run this application, it's going to always rename everything as a web class. Well, that's okay, but that's not really what I want it to do. I'd like to be able to specify what I want that file name to be each time. So we're going to come back over to our application and we're going to start modifying it. Okay? So everybody with me so far? Real simple Automator. We select the files and then it automatically renames everything based on what we see in this window. Okay, let's move on. So now, instead of having this be a new name that says web class every time, wouldn't it be great if Automator would ask me what that file name, what I want that name to be? Well, okay, so let's make it do that. So let's go up here to our actions and type in ask. Well, what can we ask for? We can ask for confirmations, finder items. No, we don't want to do that. Ask for text. That looks right. So I'm going to drag that up there at the beginning. Ask for text. And you saw the first line there, it said question. What should my question be? Type in the name of the client. Because in my workflow, I like to have a client name dash the 3-digit number so that I always know who those files belong to. I'm going to tell it, make sure when I run this that I have to type in an answer before it lets me move on. Okay, that's great. I typed in the client name. So what do I do with that? Well, that's when I start getting into variables. Okay, so I'm going to come in and I'm going to type in set variable. Because that's just something I know from mousing around a lot in here. So this is one you probably want to remember as a note. Set value of variable. I'm going to drag that as my next step. So it's going to ask for the text, and then it says set value of variable. That's hard to say fast. Set value of variable. Okay, so the variable, I need to make a new variable, and I'm going to type in client name, because that reminds me what it is. When I do that, see right down here at the bottom of the screen, I now have a client name show up in here. So hopefully I can drag that up in there, and it doesn't. Okay, so this brings us to our first this is when you have to get out of the really easy stuff and get into something that's a little bit more complicated. So 2 ways I'm going to show this to you. First off, I'm going to jump out of desktop sharing, and I am going to send you guys a file. So I'm going to open up a transfer dialog, and I'm going to send you a file called Automator Hints. So on your screen right now, you should see a window that comes up that says File Transfer, and just click on that and choose Download. It's a really, really tiny file. So I'm going to give you guys just a second to get that. And if you guys would just respond in the chat once you have that downloaded, and then I'll get back to the other part of our class. So you should see the chat window over on the right side. Thanks, Alan. So Eric, JR, and Tim, let me know if you've been able to get that file downloaded yet, or if you're having problems, just type that in as well. Okay, we're going to continue, and if you guys didn't get that, just let me know at the end of the class. Thanks, JR, and I can put that up again. So we're going to go back to sharing my desktop. And in this Automator file, or in that Automator hints, there is a text, there's a line here that says how to use a variable when you can't drag a variable into the field. And there is a web article there that explains how to do that. So this gets a little bit complicated, and if you're creating a workflow and you need to do this step of it and you get stuck, email me and I can help you through this section, and there's some hints and tricks that we can do for this as well. So what I need to do is I'm going to save this as a new one. So I'm going to save this one as rename 2 and make sure I save that as a workflow. And what I'm going to do is, here's my workflow file again. Let's move some stuff around, make this a little cleaner for you. I'm going to right-click or control-click on that and say Show Package Contents. And these steps are all listed in that web page link that I showed you. When I open up that package contents, I'll see a contents folder and this document.workflow, WFlow. If I open that, and I can say to open that with a text editor, and I use this little one called Espresso, it shows me all this nasty computer code. And so I need to go in and find that variable. So I'm going to do a search for client name. So you see down here, it's highlighted client name right here at the bottom. Okay, if I look up from that, oops, I need to move one thing here. Hold on just a second. I forgot to bring this back over. Once I bring that client, find where that client name is located, then I can come in and look for this really nasty piece of code right there. So this really long, basically a string. For Automator, that's the code that it uses for the client name. So I'm going to highlight that string and copy it, and then just close out of that workflow, or out of that file. So I'm going to bring my workflow back over, and where it says new name, I'm going to type in $, parentheses, that long variable, and then parentheses. So that's going to bring in my client name as a variable. So like I said, there's a few fields that won't accept a variable like client name, and this is your workaround for that. Like I said, that text document that I sent you gives you that client name as well, or it shows you those steps. So let's save this workflow. And now we're going to do a save as and save this one as our application. And press save and move that out of the way. So now on our desktop we have our rename 2 application. So I'm going to double click on that, and the first thing is I get this window prompt. It says type in the name of the client. Okay, so I'm going to type in the client name of Bentley. If I could type, okay. I'm going to press OK. Now it brings up the window that we saw before. Select the files that you want to rename. I'm going to go to my To Rename folder. I'm going to select all of those. Did I mess that up again? I did. Dang it. Okay, so let's fix that real quick. Multiple selection, save as. Okay, so let's try that again. Rename 2, Bentley, select my files, To Rename, choose, and now if we open up that To Rename folder, we see they've now been renamed with my variable in there. Okay, pretty cool. So now I don't need to go to Photoshop to rename. I can just tell Automator to do that for me. So once again, let's go through that workflow just to step through it. It's asking for the text. It sets the variable. So that's the first line. I'll make this a little bit bigger so we can see it all at once. Then it says, hey, go find the files that you want to rename, and then it renames them. Okay, this is all well and good. Let's make this a little bit more complicated. Let's say those files are on a compact flash card, and I want to move them to my desktop, and then I want to rename them. Pretty good. So how do we do that? So let's first thing let's do is we want to come in and I've got to read my notes. I lost track of how I was going to do that. Okay, so we're going to start off with the same workflow that we had before. We're going to ask for the text. We're going to set that as a variable. We're going to ask for the Finder items. Those are the images on our media card. Now we need to make a new folder. So I'm going to type in new folder, and I have two options there. I have a new dated folder or just a straight new folder. So we're going to drag down the new folder option, put that here, and what do I want the folder name to be? Well, it'd be really nice if the folder name was the client name. In this case, I can drag that up there. Now, what if I want to have a date in that new folder name as well? Well, that's where I can come over to variables and type in date. So do I want to use the current time or today's date? I think I'm going to use today's date. So I'm going to drag that into my variable option, which is down there now, today's date. If I edit that, I can choose the format that I want that to be in. And so I can say, do I want it in year, month, date? What format? So personally, I like to see things year first, then I like to see the month, and then I like to see the day. Now, between those, I'm just going to come in and type in a dash as a text field, and I want to see the month numerically. So let's change that to the 01, and we're going to change the day to the 05. So now everything is going to be in a sequential order of year, month, day. Say done. So I can drag that in front of the client name or after the client name. So for my workflow, I like having everything in date order. So if I come in and look at a folder of images or a folder where all my jobs are, everything is year, month, day, and then the client name. So that's what we just did there. And then we're going to say, so we've created this new folder. The next thing that we need to do is say get Finder. So we need to get the contents that we selected up here when we asked for the Finder items and place them in this new folder. So I'm going to drag that right there, get folder contents, and now that's going to rename them. So let's save this. Well, let's make sure I have multiple selections. Yes. I'm not going to mess that up again. So File, Save As, Rename, New Folder, Workflow. That's been created. And then File, Save As, Application. So we'll move that out of the way. We'll move that, close it. We're going to see it for a second, but right here, so there's our rename folder, and there's our little Automator guy. So let's run him. Same thing that's going to happen again. What's the name of the client? Well, I'm going to call this one John. Say OK. Select the files that I want to rename. So we'll go to my To Rename folder, select everything, press Choose. It's created a folder now on my desktop called 2011-07-27, that's today's date, and named it John. When I open that up, all the files inside of it have been renamed John with his sequential number 1 through 16. just like that. So we have stepped from our very first Automator, which was a basic rename. We went to a second one, which then gave us the ability to start putting variables in. Now we're using that variable in two different places, once to create the name of the file, and then a second time to rename the files so that we have a folder named John, and then we have all the images renamed with John in them as well. Pretty good? Now, at the end of the class, I'm going to share some of these workflows with you, and that way you can open them up and start modifying them, or you can use them as a template to create your own workflows. Okay? So let's go one step further. There used to be an application for PC users, the people on the dark side, and it was called Backup and Burn. And what Backup and Burn did was helped make your workflow consistent for downloading files. So what it would do is you would put in your compact flash card, you'd start Backup and Burn, and it would take your images, it would prompt you for the customer's name, it would rename the files based on the customer name, it would move them to the first location, like your images folder. You had an option then to move them to a second location, another hard drive, and then it would burn a CD or a DVD for you. It was a great application. It was a great workflow application. It helped people be real consistent in their workflow because it did a lot of things for them where they didn't have to click and think. And until I started, that really is the application that first made me start working with Automator, because I wanted to be able to do that on my Mac, but there wasn't an application that let me do that. So we're going to step through that now and take what we've already done and keep moving forward on that. So the things that we're going to change on this is the workflow that I want to do is I want to select my images. I want to save them to my pictures folder. I want to save them to my backup hard drive. I have a hard drive here called Images, and that's where I put, that's my second location to save my files. So now the files are on the compact flash card, they are on my hard drive, they're on an external hard drive, and then I want it to burn a CD or a DVD for me at the end without me having to step through each one of those steps. Okay? Pretty simple? Well, it is with Automator. So the first thing that we want to do, we're going to keep with ask for text, set the name of the variable. We're going to find our files. We're going to create a new folder, and I'm going to modify that just by putting a dash in there between the date and the client name. And I want to put that first folder in my pictures directory. The next thing that we want to do, and I'm double checking my workflow here, so give me just a second. There we go. I've created these last night, and I'm just verifying that I've got everything right in them because I get confused sometimes. Okay, so we're going through, we set our variable, we've asked for the finder items, we've made our new folder, moved everything in there, and renamed it. Now I'm going to do another get folder content. This time, oops, I didn't get that in the right spot. I'm going to put it there and then drag it down. Sometimes when these get long, let me show you, this is a good trick. Click the little arrows to close off the ones that you don't need to change. I'm going to put this get folder contents at the end. So it's going to rename those finder items. It's going to get the contents of that folder. And now I'm going to do another new folder. Put it down here. I'm going to put in how I want to name it again, today's date, dash, client name, and I'm going to specify where I want that one to be saved. So I'm going to choose Other, and I'm going to place that on my Images hard drive. So right there, say choose. So now it's going to take those files and move them into that location. And then I'm going to bring in burn a CD at the end, and I'm going to name that disk with my client name. Make sense? So our steps, walk through them. Ask for text. This is my name of the client. It sets that as a variable being my client name. It asks me then to go find the files. So this is going to be, I'm going to change this, select files that you want to download. Now, in my case, I tend to put in a lot of different media cards, and so sometimes I have Canon, sometimes I have Nikon. But if you're always coming from the same type of media card, you could choose that media card location. So I'm going to press choose. It's going to create a new folder in my pictures folder. It's going to get the contents up there that we selected from the media card. It's going to rename them. It's going to take all those files, put them on my images to hard drive, and then it's going to prompt me to burn a CD or a DVD. So let's save this one. So we're saving it as a workflow, and I'm going to call download burn on my desktop. Save that one more time as an application, and we'll get that out of the way. So here's my download burn workflow and my download burn application. So keep those in order. So let's open up download burn, double click it to launch, type in the name of the client, and I'm going to call this one Tim. Press OK. Select the files that you want to download. It automatically started on my card reader. Open that up, grab the images. There's a folder of images right there. I'm going to select them. Say choose. Now see this gear up here? That means it's working. Automator has completed. It's already gone through those steps that quickly. These were small JPEGs, and it says now put in a blank or erasable disk. I'm not going to do that right now, so I'm just going to press cancel. So let's see what happened. Let's open up our images folder. Let's filter that. Come down here to the bottom. Oops, actually to the top. There's my new folder, 2011-727 Tim. Files are named Tim 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Let's go now to our pictures folder. Open that up as a new window. Come down here to the bottom. There's our Tim folder, and the files are in there as well. So I just now, with 3 clicks, grabbed all the files on my media card, moved them to folder 1 that was created with my variable name, my client name, renamed those files, then duplicated them to a second folder on an external hard drive, and then finally burned a CD or a DVD that was named with the client name. Pretty slick? I thought so. So far everything we have done is just based on using the Mac operating system. Let's step this up another notch. So I'm done with this application, and I'm going to be done with that. And we're going to go a little bit fancier. Now, I'm going to share with you today this download workflow and probably the rename folder workflow, because those two, while they're very similar, you're going to see some good parts in between that you can use back and forth. The next one, unfortunately, I can't share with you because it has some other things in it that you'll need to purchase. So back on that Automator Hints text document that I sent earlier, there is a web link here for Photoshop plugins for Automator. So let's go look at that page. And this is Automator Actions. This will launch Photoshop and run actions that you've written in Photoshop from Automator. And he walks you through it. I would encourage you to read through all of this. And honestly, I would purchase this Automator Actions Pack version 5 Pro. It's $20. and there's a lot of stuff in it. If you don't have the Pro version, you're not going to be able to do a lot of the things you really need for your workflow. So how do we set this up now? So what I want to do is, let me get to my workflow. What this workflow is going to do is I'm going to say, first off, where do I want to save my files? That's where it's going to enter in here. It's going to save that as my folder name variable like we've done earlier, and it's going to create that on my desktop. Now this one automatically looks for files in a folder called Run. That's where it goes. So I can place stuff into that folder, and that's what it will run on. I could also say go browse and find those files like we did earlier for the renaming function. I could use that same command right there. It's then going to get those folder contents, and now you see a new icon here called Open. So if I come to my Photos and type in Open, because that's what I'm going to be working with, I can see Open in Photoshop. That's what the little PS means. It's using my Photoshop icon. It's then going to do a do action. So one of the nice things about Automator is when you bring up one of the steps, it tells you what this does. So this is going to do an action. It's going to come through and do the action Run Me in the set Automator class. So if I jump into Photoshop, I see I have an action set called Automator class. In there is an action called Run Me. It's going to run portraiture. It's going to run two other actions. It's going to make a selection, inverse it, add a vignette, and flatten all that down. Okay? Then render is my option to save the file out. So I'm going to take the files, save those to a JPEG, and it's going to save it into a destination folder, being my desktop. Now, once again, right there, see that big, long, hairy piece of code? That is the actual variable code that's inside of my workflow. Just like we did for our file name, I can't drag this variable up in there, but I can put that dollar parentheses code parentheses in there, so it will do it that way. This prompts me to rename it if I want. I can say for different types of JPEGs, so I'm going to do an optimized, for example, or I can do a standard. Standard is what I would do. I'm going to embed a color profile. The next thing that it's going to do is I have another open command, and that's going to remember all those files that I just worked off of. It's then going to do a fit image, so it's going to size all those files down and save them in the same location with a folder named called, or a file name called web in front of it. So now it's going to take my images, run portraiture, do a couple other actions on them, put a vignette on them, save the full res files, and then come back and do it all a second time, or take those files that we already ran all those actions on, open them up, size them down, and save that as a new file for me. Okay, so let's actually run this one and see how it goes. So the first thing, because of the way I have it set up, I have a folder called Run, and I'm going to take a bunch of images and put in there. So let's use the images we just downloaded from our Pictures folder. So I'm just going to copy those, press and paste those into my Run folder. Then I'm going to run my Photoshop workflow. I had an Automator over on my second screen. Now it says, where do I want to save these? So I'm going to save these on my desktop, and I'm going to call these Tim Retouched. Say OK. See the little gear moving up here. It's opening the files. I went around the lab and took some snapshots today, and you can see it's putting actions on those. It's running portraiture. Uh-oh, had a pull out of her head. That wasn't good. That one's a little blurry, but I'll live with it. So it just ran through the first step, and now it's taking those retouched files, and all it's doing now is sizing them down. So in my Tim Retouched folder, you can see now I have 10 images. So if we look through those, there's the first one, and to compare that, so you know it was retouched, let's open that one in Photoshop. And you can see that there's been a little bit of smoothing, it's been warmed up, there's a vignette put on it. So that's what our actions were doing. And gone through and done that to each of those images. And then it sized them down real small so they're ready for uploading to Facebook. Pretty handy. So that's an easy way to integrate Photoshop into this. So you're just going to take the basic things that we've already talked on and start adding more steps. Now, let's look at one more thing that we can do. I'm going to take this Tim Retouched and delete it. And if I go into my application, so I'm going to come back into my Photoshop, and I just lost it. Where'd it go? There we go. And this time I'm going to change it up just a little bit. Instead of asking for text here, I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm going to bring in a variable, current time. And I'm going to have to go in behind the scenes again. I should have preset this one and I didn't. So we'll just do that one more time so you guys can see it. I'm going to open up Photoshop Workflow, show package contents, open up that document workflow, and open that with a text editor. Alan just sent me a text and or a chat message, and I did not cover that. If Alan asked do I have to have Photoshop open to have that automation work? And the answer is no, because Automator will launch Photoshop if it needs it. I need to come back in here again just a second. So again, I'm coming down here, grabbing the current time string, and then right above that is that really long string. Copy that, close that without saving, and up here where I want to put, where I save it, I'm going to paste in that new variable. I'll show you why I'm doing this. It'll make perfect sense in just a minute. One other hint when you're doing a Photoshop workflow, when you get to this Do Action line, check this Use Longer Apple Event Timeout. What that does is, if you don't have that checked, if Automator doesn't see anything happening for a certain amount of time, it times out and throws an error code. So if you're running a really complicated action, or you have really large files and portraitures having to really chomp on them, make sure you have that checked. It'll give you a longer timeout period. Make sure I've got everything set up in here. I've saved that workflow. I'm going to save it now as a new application. Put that on my desktop and close that. This is the reason I like using that run workflow. This is going to make sense real quick. So let's delete. I'm going to clear off some of this. You see how my desktop gets so messy? just like this. Okay, I don't need that one anymore. That's my cleanup folder. I better not delete that. I'll be in trouble. And, okay, so on my desktop now, I have my Run folder with my images in it. I have a new Photoshop workflow that's automatically going to run. It's going to create a folder based on the time, and it's going to run those in there. So I'm going to press cancel on that and close out of that because I think I messed it up. But here is why I'm going to do that. If I've got everything right, I'm going to now come into iCal. You're like, what's iCal have to do with Automator? Well, I'll show you. We're going to come into today's day, and I have an Automator folder, so to speak, set on iCal. So on Automator, I'm going to come in and create a new event. I'm going to double click and say I want that event to start at 11:25. I want it to do an alarm that says open file. Okay? So why am I opening a file, and what file am I going to open? The file that I want to open, I'm going to say Other. I'm going to go to my desktop, maybe clicking here. I'm going to come down here and choose my Photoshop workflow and select that. I'm going to set on date, and that's going to be at 11:25. So now I have an alarm set for 11:25, and it doesn't do it exactly on the minute, but within a minute or so of 11:25, it's going to launch that Photoshop workflow, which is then going to go and grab all the images out of my Run folder, create a new folder on the desktop with the time that we just created, save those files in there for me. So how could I use this? Wedding photographer. I have 200 images that I want a basic retouch and vignette applied to. I don't want to tie up my computer during the day running a big action to do that because I need to maybe be retouching other images, working on other orders, whatever. I can set an iCal event, have my computer turned on at night so that at 2 in the morning, for example, it opens up, grabs all the files out of that Run folder, does the actions to them, saves them out for me, and when I come in the next morning, all that work is done. I didn't have to queue anything up. Didn't have to remember. All I did was created that calendar event and went from there. So let's see. Oh, hey, it just clicked over. Did you see that 11:25 click up? It's working on the image. And I obviously have something wrong in my workflow because it's not saving it properly, but that's okay. You get the idea. And it would go through and finish that. So obviously I need to test this workflow a little bit more before I can put it into an iCal event. But you got the idea of the launch. It created the folder and is moving forward from there. Okay, let me jump back to the main screen here, and I want to share a couple workflows with you so you can review them. So I'm going to take those and zip up our rename and the downloaded burn one. And I'm going to transfer those over to you. So that transfer window is going to open up again. And those files, you should now be able to click on that file name and choose Download. So a couple things that you'll need to know. Let me go back to, I'm going to leave that transfer window open. It may disappear when I go back to screen sharing, but I'll come back. But the couple things that you'll need to remember, especially on that download and burn one, you're going to want to come in and specify this folder location as well as down just a little bit further, you're going to want to specify this second folder location. So you'll want to reprogram those two steps so that it saves where you want it to go. Okay? So make sure you do that on that action when you're running it. And just make sure, and if you guys will just let me know if you've been able to get that Automator workflow zip file downloaded. You can send that in the chat. And for those of you that may be watching this in a recording, posted on our website, I'm going to try to post that zip file on the web page or have a link to it so you can download these from the H&H website as well. Okay, that brings us to the end of today's class. As always, thanks for attending. Hopefully you picked up some really cool workflow things for Automator, gave you some ideas on researching that. Something else to let you know is there are tons of resources online. Just type in Automator, start Googling that. There's a lot of information out there. And as always, send me an email if you've got a problem or give me a call here at the lab and I'll do whatever I can to help you out. So I'm going to stop the recording.